On the morning of April the 26th, 1947, a man clipped his fingernails. He cut 3 strands of his own hair. He folded them carefully into a small pouch made from his handkerchief so they could be carried back to Japan for burial. Then he walked out to face a firing squad. That man had commanded one of the most catastrophic massacres in the history of human civilization, and yet, in his final hours, he wasn't screaming, he wasn't begging. He was writing a poem. That detail alone should tell you everything about how this man saw himself, and it raises a question that historians are still wrestling with today. Was Hisao Tani a monster who knew exactly what he was doing, or a product of a military machine that turned ordinary men into something far worse? We're going to answer that. And the answer is more complicated and more disturbing than you think. Most people have heard of the Holocaust. Most people know Auschwitz, know Nuremberg, know the faces that came out of Nazi Germany, but there was a parallel atrocity happening on the other side of the world, 6 weeks long, targeting an entire city, killing somewhere between 100,000 and 340,000 people. The true number is still debated, and that debate itself is part of the story. It was called the Rape of Nanking, and Hisao Tani didn't just witness it, he commanded the division that led it. But here's where it gets complicated, because when the trial came, only 2 generals were ever prosecuted for the entire massacre. Dozens of others walked free, some given immunity, some already dead, some protected by politics. Tani was the one who faced the bullet. Was that justice, or was it selective accountability dressed up as justice? By the end of this video, you'll have an opinion, and it might surprise you. Welcome to the Darkroom Archive. We don't do headlines here, we do the stories that were meant to be buried. Subscribe if you value the facts over the fluff. Now let's dive in. Hisao Tani was born on December 22nd, 1882, in Japan. He rose through the Imperial Japanese Army the old-fashioned way, steadily, methodically, rank by rank. By 1937, he was a lieutenant general commanding the 6th Division. Here's a fact most people skip over. Tani was not an unknown fringe officer. He was a decorated, respected general in one of the most disciplined armies in the world. That matters, because what happened under his command wasn't the result of a rogue unit going out of control. It was systematic, it was reported up the chain, and it kept going for 6 weeks. So when Tani later said his troops kept discipline, that statement doesn't just insult history, it insults every witness who survived to contradict it. Here's something the textbooks often gloss over. Nanking didn't fall quietly. The Chinese nationalist government had already fled the capital before the Japanese even entered. The military command had collapsed. Civilians were left behind, hundreds of thousands of them, with no government, no organized defense, and nowhere to go. Think about that. A capital city, abandoned by its own leaders, surrounded by a foreign army. Into that vacuum walked Tani's 6th Division on December 13, 1937. What followed has been described as an orgy of violence so extreme that even some Japanese soldiers were reportedly disturbed by it. The verdict from Tani's own trial used the words unparalleled and extremely violent. Now, journalist point of view for a second, because this matters. The death toll figures for Nanking range from 40,000 to over 340,000 depending on the source. That's not a small discrepancy. That's a gap the size of an entire city. Why does that gap exist? Politics. Japan's conservative historians have pushed the lower numbers. China's official position is 300,000, a number literally carved into the Nanking Massacre Memorial. The Nanjing War Crimes Tribunal itself cited over 300,000 deaths in its verdict. But here's what's not disputed. Burial charity records alone documented the disposal of 369,366 bodies, and that number deliberately excluded any overlapping or unreliable reports. You can argue about the total. You cannot argue about those burial records. And over 20,000 women were raped. That figure is a conservative consensus across multiple independent historical sources. These aren't propaganda numbers. These are documented, cross-verified, and still somehow debated in Japanese public school textbooks today. Here's where the story takes a genuinely strange turn. While all of this was happening, there was a small group of Western foreigners still inside Nanking. They had set up an international safety zone, and they documented everything in real time. One of them was John Rabe, a German, a Nazi Party member, actually, who found the violence so horrific that he personally intervened to stop Japanese soldiers from attacking civilians. He wrote detailed diaries that became critical evidence. Think about the absurdity of that for a second. A card-carrying Nazi was the one writing letters begging the Japanese military to stop. Another witness was Minnie Vautrin, an American missionary who ran Ginling College as a refugee shelter, protecting thousands of women inside its walls. Her diary entries, shaking, exhausted, written night after night, were later submitted as prosecution evidence. These weren't Chinese government officials with political motives. These were foreign nationals with nothing to gain, and their testimony helped convict Tani. Now, here's where the journalist in the room has to ask the uncomfortable question. Tani was arrested in February 1946 by American occupation authorities. China formally requested his extradition. He was handed over and tried at the Nanjing War Crimes Tribunal. Trial opened February 6, 1947. Verdict: guilty on March 10th. But the World War II database, citing historical critics, notes that the trial process was criticized as rushed and poorly conducted. The evidence that sealed his fate? Now here's the critical angle. Tani was essentially the only general tried for the Nanking Massacre. Prince Yasuhiko Asaka, who was arguably higher in the command chain, was granted full immunity by General Douglas MacArthur simply because he was a member of the Japanese imperial family. Let that land. A prince who commanded forces during the same massacre walks free. A general gets the bullet. Was Tani guilty? Almost certainly yes. The evidence is overwhelming. But was the trial complete justice, or a carefully managed performance of accountability that let the real power structure escape untouched? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer. Tani did appeal his death sentence. The appeal was personally rejected by Chinese President Chiang Kai-shek the day before the scheduled execution, 1 day before. Not after careful review, not after months of deliberation, 24 hours before the firing squad. That tells you the political calculus at work. China needed this execution. The survivors of Nanking needed to see it happen. And Chiang Kai-shek was not going to be the man who let Hisao Tani live. From a purely human standpoint, understandable. From a legal standpoint, that's not how appeals are supposed to work. On the morning of April the 26th, 1947, Hisao Tani did something quietly extraordinary. He clipped his fingernails. He cut 3 strands of hair. He wrapped them in a handkerchief pouch to be sent back to Japan. He wrote a poem. A man who had overseen some of the worst mass violence of the 20th century spent his final hours in contemplative, almost meditative calm. Was that peace? Denial? Arrogance? Nobody who was in that room with him has given us a definitive answer. But the contrast between that quiet morning and the city of Nanking in December 1937 is the kind of thing that sticks with you. The execution was carried out at Mount Yuhuatai, on the outskirts of Nanking. That location was not random. Yuhuatai had itself been a mass execution site during the massacre. Japanese forces had killed Chinese soldiers and civilians there in 1937. Now it was where Tani would die. He was escorted off a truck by 2 military police. He was not tied up. He was positioned facing north, toward the city of Nanking. An eyewitness account described this as symbolic, an act of atonement to the people of Nanjing, a single shot to the back of the head. The crowd that had gathered erupted, "Revenge! Revenge!" So here's the honest, uncomfortable analysis. Hisao Tani was guilty. The court verdict stated the evidence was certain. Mass murders, rape, looting, burning people alive, beheadings. The burial records, the foreign witness diaries, the film footage, all of it points in one direction. But the trial was rushed. The appeal was politically predetermined. The men above Tani in the command chain, including an imperial prince, never faced a single day in court. That's not unique to Japan. That pattern, where the man at the middle of the chain takes the bullet while the men at the very top escape, is one of the defining failures of post-war international justice. It happened in Nuremberg too, just to a lesser degree. So what did Tani's execution actually achieve? It gave Nanking survivors a moment, a real documented public moment of accountability. A crowd screaming revenge at a man who had earned every single syllable of it. Was it complete justice? No. Was it something? Absolutely yes. History has a way of giving us clean endings to messy stories. The bad general gets shot, the survivors cheer, the world moves on. But the real story, the one that keeps historians up at night, is everything that didn't happen. The trials that never took place, the immunity deals quietly signed, the textbooks that left it out entirely. Hisao Tani faced the bullet at Yuhuatai with 3 strands of hair in a handkerchief and a poem in his pocket. The city he helped destroy is still standing. The memorial hall in Nanking still lists 300,000 names, and the debate over what really happened and who else should have stood trial is still going. If this video made you think differently about what justice actually looks like, share it, subscribe to Darkroom Archive, and stay with us, because the next video goes even deeper into the trials the world almost forgot. We'll see you in the episode.